They were embodying a brand of manhood that looks like Jesus.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
When you have a battle to deal with, you're not stopping to figure out if it's okay for me to do. You're going to do what you can. And that's what we're all called to.
I appreciate your study as well on Tamar. You break the rules on Tamar. So we're going to have links to these books, but I'd like to dive into your Maelstrom book. What's going on in there, and what's your message for us?
Well, I ran into these men because I was researching biblical narratives about women. And there were men in their stories that weren't following the party line in terms of what manhood requires, and they get mocked. Barak gets mocked because he would go to battle if Deborah wouldn't hold his hand. That's kind of how they look at it. Instead, he's facing a David and Goliath battle, and he wants to know if God is in it, because he's not going to lead the men he leads into a bloodbath, and they're completely overpowered with what he's facing. And, the point God makes is, if I want to defeat Sisera, I can do it with a woman who has no military training at all. And the most amazing moment in that story is when Barak runs chasing Sisera, and he comes to her tent, and he goes inside and he sees what she's done, and it's sort of like, no wonder he's singing praises to God and thanking him for Deborah and Jael, for it's, but we go to these narratives, and we have to implement our policy of men and women in our interpretations, and the Bible just blows it to bits. And the Judah Tamar story is it's my favorite. I really love Boaz, but Judah is he's a monster. And God is in pursuit of him, and the turnaround in his story ought to make everyone weep when they read it. And it's, you need to get that book. But anyway, I ran across these men as I was researching women. So I was researching Tamar, I was researching Ruth and Mary of Nazareth, and the men in their stories weren't following the recipe for what a man is supposed to be and do. And they were embodying a brand of manhood that looks like Jesus. And I wanted to tell their stories. I didn't have an agenda when I started it, but my husband started looking at he always is my first editor, and he said, "You're talking about patriarchy." And I said, "I am." I didn't mean to do that, but I was very, the introduction in that book, I was very concerned about what is happening in the Middle East, and it was ISIS at the time. And what I was learning about them from secular experts was that these young men from America and Europe are going to ISIS. And the reason they're going, over and over, they found this to be true, is that they're looking for meaning, a sense of meaning, purpose, and belonging. And I said, where are we in this conversation? Why aren't they coming to us? Why don't we offer all of those things to them? So that's sort of, and my husband was the one who said, you're talking about patriarchy. And what I say in that book is that patriarchy is not the Bible's message. It's the backdrop to the Bible's message. And we need to understand the patriarchal world better than we do if we're going to understand what the Bible's telling us. And if we're going to get the radical, revolutionary nature of the gospel, then we have to know what's going on in terms of the patriarchal world.
So give us an example of one of these refocused pictures that we should learn from your book.
Well, go to the book of Ruth. You know, when Naomi loses her husband and her 2 sons, and she's postmenopausal, you know, we just kind of kick her to the curb, and, you know, we want to hear this story of Ruth. But what you have is a woman who is out jobbing Job because she's a woman's purpose, and you see the angst in all these barrenness stories, is that a woman's purpose is to produce sons for her husband. And so when she can't do that, and her life's work is destroyed when her husband and her sons die. And the book of Genesis itself is, you know, the linchpin of patriarchy is primogeniture, which is the rights of the firstborn son. And God doesn't play by patriarchy's rules. And the book of Genesis it could be titled Warring Brothers. And what they're warring over is patriarchy. It's primogeniture, because God chooses Abel and not Cain, the firstborn. And Cain kills his brother. And Esau wants to kill his brother. And it's all about firstborn rights. The firstborn son gets a double inheritance. And it really comes out in the Judah story, because Judah has 3 sons. And that means he'll divide his inheritance 4 ways. The firstborn gets half, and the second and third each get a quarter. So when the firstborn son dies, son number 2 now will get 2/3 instead of a 4th. And the youngest son will get a 1/3, okay? Because the father divides it now into 3 parts. So he gets 2/3 instead of a 4th, and he's being asked to replace his older brother. Not gonna do it, you know. You know, he talked to his accountant, and his accountant said, you know, this is a good way to lose everything. So, you know, everything. And then the 12 sons of Jacob, when he wants to give everything to number 11. Number 11 was an outrage, and they wanted to kill Joseph. And I think Judah thought he was next in line, because his 3 older brothers had all disgraced their father, shamed their father. But anyway, Judah turns into a monster. and yet through Tamar, God reels him in. It's just, I think if you don't weep when Judah speaks to Joseph and doesn't know it's Joseph, you know, something's wrong with you. It's so powerful. So what I'm learning from patriarchy is that we have to understand how the patriarchal culture works if we hope to understand biblical narratives. Patriarchy is the backdrop to the Bible's message, and it unleashes the radical, revolutionary nature of the gospel. So we need to read Half the Sky, and we need to find out about Malala, and she can't go to school in her country and they want to kill her, and why it's okay for women being killed in different countries, or that why they're not even second-class citizens. It's all related to patriarchy. And we want a kinder, gentler patriarchy in the church, and Jesus doesn't want any of it. And Jesus doesn't follow those rules. He talks to women in public. He includes them as his disciples. They learned from him. He encounters women in a public space and has a deep theological conversation with them, and the one who stands with him in the battle that he was facing was a woman, Mary of Bethany, who sat at his feet and listened to him, who struggled when her brother died and Jesus didn't come in time to save him, and learned to trust him at a deeper level. No matter what he said or did, trusting him was the safest way to go. And so she anoints him for his burial. And he said, she has done a beautiful thing to me.
There are so many misinterpretations we have throughout Scripture. When Joy came, she would study and research on her PhD, and I got to be her first reader. And she'd say, "Hey, look what I found." And I would listen to that, and I said, this is amazing. Yeah. I had a different doctoral dissertation topic I was going to work on. And when we got to Africa, we had thieves break in and stole all my notes. And for about a year, I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. And finally, some wise friends said, isn't there anything else that you've studied at this level? And I said, yeah, I've looked at the New Testament passages. You'd be interested in this. Joy's doctoral dissertation is called a rhetorical analysis of Genesis 2-3. So she looks at the rhetorical pattern, the literary patterns of Genesis 2 and 3. And so what I ended up doing was looking at the literary patterns of Ephesians 5 and 6 and 1 Timothy 2 and 3, seeing that Paul actually took the pattern from Genesis 2 and 3 and built out Ephesians 5 and 6 using the same pattern, and 1 Timothy 2 and 3 using the same pattern. And when you look at those patterns, it opens up. It's just amazing what we begin to see. Oh, there's so much more we need to talk to you about, and your whole collection, library of books that you've written, and we don't have time. So we're going to put the links in the show notes down below and encourage people to learn so much more about Carolyn Custis James. And we appreciate you being with us on the Eden Podcast today.
Thank you so much.
Tru316 Foundation is the home of the Eden Podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to tru316.com/partner.